The dawn light splintered across the Wyoming horizon like fire on water, but Felicity James barely noticed her numbed fingers trembling as she mixed the last of her precious pigments on a scrap of wooden pallet. 3 days without a proper meal had left her light-headed, yet something compelled her to capture the blazing sunrise over Riverside's eastern plains before her strength abandoned her completely. Mason Jameson reined in his stallion at the crest of the ridge, startled by the sight of a lone woman perched on a rock outcropping in the April chill of 1878. Her dress hung loose on her frame, and even from a distance, he could see her shoulders quaking with each brushstroke. What kind of fool painted instead of eating? The question stuck in his throat as he caught sight of her canvas, a brilliant explosion of color that somehow captured the very essence of Wyoming's wild beauty. Felicity didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over the whisper of her brush against canvas. When a shadow fell across her work, she startled, nearly dropping her palette as she whirled to face the stranger. "Pardon me, madam," the cowboy said, his voice a gentle rumble that belied his imposing frame. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, and concern etched lines around his blue eyes. "Didn't mean to frighten you." She clutched her brush tighter. "You didn't frighten me." Her voice betrayed her with a slight quaver. Strangers on the frontier often meant trouble, especially for a woman alone. "Mason Jameson," he said, tipping his hat. "Just rode in from Cheyenne." He gestured toward her painting. "That's mighty fine work." Pride briefly overcame her caution. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson." "Mason, please." His gaze shifted from the canvas to her face, noting the hollows in her cheeks and the dark circles beneath her eyes. "When's the last time you ate, Miss Felicity James?" She straightened her back, attempting dignity despite her rumbling stomach. "My meals are not your concern, sir." Mason swung down from his horse, movements deliberate to avoid startling her further. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a cloth-wrapped package. "Got some jerky and cornbread. Nothing fancy, but it'll quiet a hungry belly." The scent of food made her dizzy with longing, but pride kept her fingers clenched around her brush. "I don't accept charity, not charity." His eyes fell on her paints, the nearly empty jars of color. "Trade food for colors." Felicity's brow furrowed. "You paint?" A low chuckle escaped him. "No, madam, but I've been riding from Kansas to Montana and back again for 5 years now. Seen all manner of sunrises and sunsets across this country." He gestured to her near-empty palette. "Never saw one captured quite like that. Thought maybe I could send a piece of that beauty to my sister back east." Her stomach growled audibly, and a flush crept up her neck. I haven't much paint left. Whatever you can spare." He unwrapped the package and held it out. "Eat first. We'll settle the trade after." The cornbread was slightly stale but tasted like heaven to Felicity's empty stomach. She ate slowly, fighting the urge to devour everything at once, aware of Mason's gaze occasionally drifting to her painting. "What brings you to Riverside?" he asked, crouching to build a small fire nearby, the morning chill still lingering in the air. Felicity swallowed a bite of jerky before answering. "My father. He passed last winter." The words still caught in her throat. "He was a professor at a university in Boston. Always dreamed of painting the American West." Her fingers brushed the edge of her canvas. "I came to fulfill that dream for him. All the way from Boston, alone." Mason couldn't hide his surprise. "I had some savings, enough for train passage and supplies." She looked down at her worn boots. "Though I miscalculated how quickly both would run out." Mason added a stick to the growing flames. "And no one to take you in here. Riverside is small but not unwelcoming. I've done some work portraits mostly, teaching art to children at the schoolhouse." Pride straightened her spine. "I manage." "Clearly," he said, his tone soft with admiration rather than mockery. "Not many women would journey alone across the country for art. Not many have reason to," she replied. As the sun climbed higher, Felicity finished her meal and returned to her painting, acutely aware of Mason's presence nearby. He didn't hover, instead tending his horse and gathering more wood for the fire, occasionally glancing at her work with unconcealed appreciation. "You never said what brings you to Riverside," she finally remarked, mixing the last of her red ochre with a touch of yellow. "Work. I'm driving cattle from the Harrington Ranch to the railhead in Cheyenne." He paused. "Used to be a full-time ranch hand, but these days I mostly take on driving jobs. Pays better. Lets me see more country." Felicity nodded, understanding the appeal of movement, of new horizons. She'd felt it herself, even as Boston society had tried to confine her to drawing rooms and proper tea parties. When she finally set down her brush, the morning was half gone, but the painting had captured that first perfect moment of sunrise, the sky ablaze with amber and crimson, the distant mountains purple shadows against the dawn. "It's beautiful," Mason said quietly, coming to stand behind her. "It's yours," she replied, surprising herself. "For the food," he shook his head. "That's too much for a bit of jerky and cornbread. Then consider it payment in advance." Felicity met his eyes steadily. "I've been struggling." "If you know of work in town, actually," Mason interrupted, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "The Harrington Ranch house is being renovated." Mrs. Harrington mentioned wanting paintings for the parlor, scenes of the ranch, portraits of the family. Hope fluttered in Felicity's chest. "Do you think she would consider commissioning an unknown artist?" "She would if I recommended you." His smile transformed his weathered face. "And I'd be happy to show her this as an example of your talent." Felicity hesitated, looking at the painting that had cost her the last of her red pigment. "I can't ask you to give up your payment." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Mason's gaze was steady. "And maybe we can reach another arrangement." She raised an eyebrow, wariness returning. "Not like that," he added quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. "I meant I travel all over the territory. I could bring you supplies, paints, brushes, whatever you need from Cheyenne or Denver, in exchange." "In exchange, you could teach me about color." The request seemed to embarrass him. "I've spent my life outdoors, but I've never known how to explain what I see. The way the prairie changes from green to gold to russet. How the sky isn't just blue, but 100 shades I don't have names for." The sincerity in his request touched something in Felicity. "I think we have a deal, Mr. Jameson." "Mason," he corrected, offering his hand. Her smaller one fit into his calloused palm, and for the first time in months Felicity felt something like hope bloom in her chest. 3 days later, Felicity stood nervously in the grand entryway of the Harrington Ranch house, her portfolio of sketches clutched to her chest. Mason had arranged the meeting as promised, but she hadn't expected the imposing 2-story structure with its ornate woodwork and imported furniture. It spoke of wealth far beyond anything else she'd seen in Riverside. Amelia Harrington swept into the room in a rustle of fine fabric, her sharp eyes assessing Felicity immediately. "So you're the artist Mason has been talking about. Let's see what you've brought." For the next hour, Felicity displayed her work while Mrs. Harrington examined each piece with critical attention. Mason had remained outside, claiming he had business with the ranch foreman, but Felicity suspected he'd wanted to give her the chance to establish herself on her own merits. "You have talent," Mrs. Harrington finally declared. "Raw, perhaps, but genuine. I'll commission 3 landscapes for the main parlor and portraits of my husband and myself for the dining room." Relief washed over Felicity. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't." The woman's stern expression softened slightly. Mason mentioned your situation. There's a cabin on the south edge of our property used to house the previous ranch manager before we built him a larger home. You're welcome to stay there while you complete the commissions. Felicity blinked in surprise. That's extremely generous. It's practical, Mrs. Harrington cut in. The cabin has good northern light and you'll be able to observe the ranch at different times of day. Besides, her lips curved into a knowing smile, Mason rarely takes interest in anything besides horses and cattle. I'm curious about the woman who's caught his attention. We've only just met, Felicity protested, heat rising to her cheeks. Indeed, Mrs. Harrington's tone suggested she didn't believe that was the entire story. Well, he'll be staying through the week before taking the cattle drive south. Plenty of time for professional discussions. Outside, Mason was waiting by his horse, his expression carefully neutral. How did it go? The smile that broke across Felicity's face told him everything before she could speak. 5 commissions and a cabin to stay in while I work. His answering grin transformed his face. I had a feeling Amelia would recognize talent when she saw it. She seems to think you had other reasons for recommending me, Felicity said, unable to resist teasing him slightly. A flush crept up his neck. Mrs. Harrington has an active imagination. Does she? Felicity raised an eyebrow. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, before Mason cleared his throat. I should help you move your things to the cabin. The cabin proved to be larger than Felicity had expected, a sturdy one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and windows that indeed captured excellent northern light. Best of all, it stood on a rise overlooking a sweep of ranch land that extended to distant hills, offering endless inspiration for her commissioned landscapes. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Felicity would wake early to sketch the sunrise, then work on her paintings through the morning. Mason would appear around midday, ostensibly to check on her progress, but bringing small gifts each time: fresh eggs from the henhouse, wildflowers from the prairie, once even a jar of honey from the ranch's hives. On the 4th day, he arrived with a wooden crate, his expression like a boy with a secret. What's this? Felicity asked, setting aside her charcoal. Open it and see. He placed the crate on her small table, barely containing his excitement. Inside, nestled in straw, were glass jars of pigment reds, yellows, blues, and earths she hadn't seen since leaving Boston. Beneath them lay packets of brushes, sheets of canvas, and a new palette. Mason, she breathed, lifting a jar of ultramarine blue as if it were made of gold. How did you rode to Cheyenne yesterday? There's an art supply merchant who gets shipments from back east. He shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. Are they the right ones? Felicity felt tears prick at her eyes. They're perfect, but this must have cost. Don't worry about that. He waved away her concern. Consider it an investment in your career. When you're famous, I'll tell everyone I was your first patron. She laughed, wiping at her eyes. At this rate, I'll owe you a whole gallery of paintings. I'd rather have the lessons you promised. His expression grew serious. About color. I meant it, Felicity. I want to understand what you see when you look at the world. That evening, as the sun began to set, they sat outside the cabin while Felicity mixed small amounts of pigment on her new palette, explaining how primary colors combined to create secondaries, how adding white or black altered the value, how complementary colors created vibration when placed side by side. Mason watched her hands as she worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. So that purple in the distance of your sunrise painting, that's red and blue together. Yes, with more blue than red, and a touch of white to create the atmospheric effect. She demonstrated, creating a small wash of color that mimicked the distant mountains at dawn. And the way the grass changes color in the afternoon light. She mixed a yellow-green, then showed him how adding a touch of red earth tone warmed it. The grass itself doesn't change, but our perception of it does as the light shifts. Mason was a surprisingly apt pupil, his years of observing nature giving him an intuitive understanding once he had the vocabulary to express it. As darkness fell, they moved inside, and Felicity lit the lamps while Mason built up the fire against the evening chill. "My father would have liked you," she said suddenly, watching him arrange the logs with careful precision. He glanced up, surprised. "What makes you say that?" He believed art wasn't just for artists. He thought everyone should learn to truly see the world. She smiled at the memory. He used to say looking without seeing was like having a library and never opening the books. Wise man. Mason settled into a chair opposite her. "Is that why you came west? To see what he wanted to see?" Felicity considered the question. "Partly, but also because I needed to prove to myself maybe that I could do something bold. In Boston, I was just Professor James's peculiar daughter who preferred painting to parties." She traced the grain of the wooden table with her fingertip. "After he died, there was nothing to stay for, no family, no real connections." "No suitor?" Mason asked, then immediately looked as if he regretted the question. "There was one, a colleague of my father's." Her expression clouded. "He proposed 3 weeks after the funeral. Said it would be a sensible arrangement, he'd get a wife to manage his household, and I'd get the security of a husband's name. Not exactly a romantic proposition." "No." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I realized I'd rather risk everything than settle for sensible arrangements." The firelight cast warm shadows across Mason's face as he studied her. "I think you made the right choice." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that went beyond their casual friendship of the past few days. Felicity felt her heart quicken as Mason leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. A sudden pounding at the door made them both jump. "Miss James." A young ranch hand's voice called urgently. "Mrs. Harrington sent me to fetch you. The baby's coming early and the doctor's stuck on the other side of the river with the Dawson family." Felicity was on her feet immediately. "Elizabeth's baby, but she's not due for weeks." Mason was already reaching for his coat. "The midwife, out at the Peterson place," the boy replied. "Mrs. Harrington says to hurry." They rode hard to the main house, Mason insisting on accompanying Felicity despite her protests that childbirth was women's business. "My sister had 4 children," he explained as they galloped. "I helped with the last 2 when no one else was around. I'm no doctor, but I know how to follow instructions and stay calm." Mrs. Harrington met them at the door, her usually composed features tight with worry. "It's Elizabeth, the cook's daughter. Her husband's away with the cattle drive. She's just a girl, barely 19." A cry of pain from upstairs cut off her explanation. "Take me to her," Felicity said, already removing her coat. To Mason, she added, "We'll need hot water, clean linens, and any spirits in the house." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Elizabeth was indeed young, frightened, and in hard labor with her first child. Felicity had assisted at births in Boston. Her father's connections to the medical school had given her experiences unusual for a woman of her station, but never as the primary attendant. Mason proved true to his word, following directions without question, maintaining a steady presence even as Elizabeth's labor intensified. By midnight, they had established a rhythm, Felicity attending to Elizabeth directly, Mason keeping the fire built, water boiling, and fresh linens ready, while Mrs. Harrington prepared a tincture of herbs from the garden that seemed to ease some of Elizabeth's pain. Dawn was breaking when Elizabeth gave a final, tremendous push, and a tiny boy slid into Felicity's waiting hands. For a heart-stopping moment, the child was silent and still. Then Mason gently rubbed the baby's back with a warm cloth, and a lusty cry filled the room. "A son," Felicity announced, tears of relief streaming down her face as she placed the swaddled infant in Elizabeth's arms. Strong and perfect. The exhausted mother looked down at her child with wonder. "Thomas," she whispered, "after his father." Later, as Felicity washed up in the kitchen, Mason appeared with 2 cups of coffee. "You were amazing," he said simply, handing her one. She accepted it gratefully, her hands still trembling from the night's tension. "We both were. I don't think I could have managed alone." Mrs. Harrington says the doctor confirmed the Dawson baby arrived safely too. "Seems we have a talent for bringing new life into the world." His smile held something more than just shared accomplishment. "You know, watching you work the way you knew exactly what to do, how you kept Elizabeth calm through her fear, it was like seeing another kind of art." "Hardly art," she demurred. "No." He sat beside her. "You shape raw experience into something meaningful. You help others see beauty where they might miss it. Sounds like art to me." Felicity studied him over the rim of her cup. "For a cowboy, you have a philosophical streak, Mason Jameson. Lots of time to think under the stars." He reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Makes a man wonder about his choices." The intimate gesture sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. "What choices are you wondering about?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Harrington bustled into the kitchen. "Oh good, you're both still here. I've had rooms prepared, you must stay and rest before returning to the cabin." The moment broken, Felicity and Mason accepted the offer gratefully. As she was led to a guest bedroom, Felicity glanced back to see Mason watching her, an unspoken promise in his eyes that their conversation wasn't over merely postponed. She slept deeply, exhaustion claiming her almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. When she woke, the sun was already high in the sky. A maid brought fresh clothing, one of Mrs. Harrington's dresses, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame, and informed her that Elizabeth and the baby were doing well. Downstairs, she found Mason in conversation with Mr. Harrington, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice who clasped her hand warmly. "Mrs. Harrington tells me we owe you and Jameson here for bringing our Elizabeth safely through, and that you're the artist who'll be painting our portraits." His eyes twinkled. "Seems we found ourselves a woman of many talents." "I was happy to help," Felicity said, embarrassed by the praise. "Well, we won't forget it." He turned to Mason. "And you delaying your departure to Cheyenne for this. Good man." Felicity looked sharply at Mason. "You were supposed to leave today." A flush crept up his neck. "The drive can wait another day or two." Later, as they rode back to the cabin at a leisurely pace, Felicity pressed him on the matter. "You didn't mention you were scheduled to leave. Didn't seem important at the time." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Harrington understands. The buyer in Cheyenne will wait. But your pay will still be there." He glanced at her then, something vulnerable in his expression. "Some things matter more than schedules, Felicity." The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "I'm beginning to see that." At the cabin, Felicity found her easel set up outside, the beginnings of one of the commissioned landscapes waiting for her attention. Mason helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I should let you rest," he said, though he made no move to leave. "It's been a long night." "Stay," she heard herself say. "I'd like to paint while the light is good, and I'd appreciate the company." So he stayed, watching quietly as she mixed her new paints and continued work on the landscape. The scene depicted the Harrington Ranch at sunset, The buildings bathed in golden light, the distant mountains deepening to purple. As she worked, she explained each choice, why she placed the horizon line where she did, how the repetition of shapes created rhythm across the canvas, the way the warm colors of the buildings contrasted with the cool shadows they cast. Mason asked thoughtful questions, occasionally pointing out details she might have overlooked, the way certain trees caught the light differently, how the ranch hands returning from the fields created a natural focal point. "You have an artist's eye," she told him, genuinely impressed by his observations. He laughed softly. "No, just a cowboy's familiarity. I've spent most of my life looking at land, trying to read it. That's not so different from what I do." She added a touch of light to a window in the main house. "We're both trying to understand what we see, just with different tools." The sun was setting by the time she set down her brushes, the painting not complete but substantially advanced. Mason had built a small fire outside the cabin, and they sat beside it as twilight deepened, sharing a simple meal he had brought from the ranch house. "When do you really have to leave?" Felicity asked finally, the question that had been hovering between them all afternoon. "Tomorrow. Or the day after at latest." He prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Harrington's invested too much in this herd to risk delays." "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks to Cheyenne, then back." He hesitated. Unless. Mason set aside the stick and turned to face her fully. "There's a rancher near Laramie looking for a permanent foreman. Good pay, a house of my own on the property. I've been considering it." The implication hung in the air between them. A permanent position meant putting down roots, something Mason had avoided for years according to his own account. "What's stopping you?" she asked softly. Nothing made sense before. His eyes reflected the firelight as they searched hers. "I always figured I'd know the right place when I found it, but I never did. Now I'm wondering if it wasn't about the place at all." Felicity's heart hammered in her chest. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering directly, Mason reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her paint-stained ones. "I brought you food because you were hungry. I brought you paints because you needed them for your work. But that's not why I keep coming back." "Why do you then?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because when I'm with you, I see the world differently, more clearly." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "All my life I've been moving, looking for something I couldn't name. Then I found you painting the sunrise, and suddenly I understood what I'd been searching for." Felicity scarcely dared breathe. "And what was that?" "Someone who sees beauty where others might miss it. Someone brave enough to cross a continent alone for the chance to paint what calls to her heart." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "Someone who makes me want to stay in one place for the first time in my life." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Felicity answered by leaning into him, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt as the contact deepened. When they finally parted, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. "I should go," Mason said reluctantly, his voice husky. "Mrs. Harrington would have my hide if she knew I was here alone with you after dark." "You're right." Felicity nodded, though neither of them moved. "Propriety is important." "Extremely important," he agreed, pulling her closer for another kiss that belied his words. It was fully dark by the time Mason finally mounted his horse to return to the ranch house. "I'll come tomorrow," he promised. "We need to talk about everything." Felicity nodded, her lips still tingling from his kisses. "Tomorrow," she agreed. But tomorrow brought unexpected complications. A telegram arrived for Harrington at dawn. The buyer in Cheyenne was facing pressure from competitors and needed the cattle delivered earlier than planned. The drive would have to leave immediately, Mason appeared at Felicity's cabin just after sunrise, his expression torn between duty and desire. "I have to go," he said without preamble. "Harrington's orders." Disappointment washed through her, though she understood the necessity. "Of course. The business can't wait." "2 weeks," he said, taking her hands in his. "I'll be back in 2 weeks and then we'll figure this out, whatever this is between us." "I'll be here," she promised. "I have commissions to complete after all." He smiled at that, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "May I write to you? From the trail?" "I'd like that very much." She squeezed his hands. "Be careful, Mason." Instead of answering, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with an intensity that left her breathless. "2 weeks," he repeated when they parted. "And then I won't leave again without you." The days after Mason's departure stretched endlessly for Felicity, though she filled them with work on the Harrington commissions. Mrs. Harrington, perhaps sensing her restlessness, invited her to the main house for dinner several times, engaging her in conversation about art and her life in Boston. "Mason is a good man," the older woman said abruptly one evening as they sat in the parlor after the meal. "Reliable. Honest to a fault." Felicity felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind to me." "Kind," Mrs. Harrington repeated, her tone suggesting she found the word inadequate. "My dear, I've known that boy since he first came west 8 years ago. Not once have I seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "We've only known each other a short while," Felicity protested weakly. "Time is a poor measure of such things." Mrs. Harrington's eyes took on a faraway look. "I knew Charles was the man I would marry within an hour of meeting him. My parents thought me impulsive, but here we are 30 years later." She focused sharply on Felicity again. "What does your heart tell you?" Felicity considered the question honestly. "That I've never met anyone like him. That when I'm with him, I feel as though I'm truly seen for the first time in my life. Then the rest is just details." Mrs. Harrington nodded with satisfaction. "And Mason has always been good with details." True to his word, Mason's first letter arrived a week after his departure, delivered by a ranch hand returning from Cheyenne. The paper was creased from being carried in a pocket, the handwriting careful but unpracticed. "Dear Felicity, the trail is dusty and the days are long, but I find myself thinking of you with every sunrise. Yesterday we camped near a stream where the water reflected the sky so perfectly it looked like the world had turned upside down. I wished you were there to show me how to capture that moment in color. The foreman position in Laramie is still open. I spoke with the rancher when we passed through, and he's willing to hold it for me until after this drive. It's good land, with a view of the mountains that I think you would find worth painting. I'm not asking for promises yet. We have much to learn about each other. But I want you to know that I meant what I said when I return. I don't plan to leave again without knowing where we stand. If that seems too forward, forgive me. Life on the trail leaves little room for anything but plain speaking." Until Riverside, Mason Felicity read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in her sketchbook. That night, she began a small painting by lamplight, a cowboy on horseback, silhouetted against a dawn sky, his face turned toward the rising sun. The second week of Mason's absence brought unexpected visitors to the Harrington ranch. Elizabeth's husband, Thomas, returned with another group of ranch hands, overjoyed to find himself the father of a healthy son. His gratitude toward Felicity was effusive, and he insisted on introducing her to everyone as the angel who delivered my boy. The attention was embarrassing but brought unexpected benefits. Several of the ranch families commissioned small portraits, and the town's mayor, hearing of her work, requested a landscape for the new town hall. Suddenly, Felicity found herself with more work than she could complete in a month. "You'll need to extend your stay," Mrs. Harrington observed with a knowing smile when Felicity shared the news. "The cabin is yours for as long as necessary." "You're very generous," Felicity said. "Practical," the older woman corrected. "Talent should be nurtured, and besides," her eyes twinkled, "I suspect we'll be seeing more of you in Riverside regardless." Felicity didn't contradict her. On the morning Mason was due to return, Felicity found herself too restless to paint. She packed up her small easel and walked to the ridge where they had first met, setting up to capture the view that had started everything. The sunrise was less spectacular than that first morning, but it held a different kind of beauty, softer, more subtle, the promise of warmth rather than a dramatic blaze. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Looking up, she saw Mason reining in his horse, his face breaking into a smile that outshone the sun. "You're back," she said, stating the obvious in her surprise. "I told you I would be." He dismounted, moving toward her with purposeful strides. "Couldn't stay away a day longer than necessary." She set aside her brushes as he reached her, his arms encircling her waist as he lifted her in a jubilant embrace. When he set her down, he didn't release her, instead studying her face as if memorizing each feature. "I missed you," she admitted, her hands resting on his chest. "Good." His smile turned mischievous. "Because I've been practicing my proposal speech for 2 weeks now, and it would be mighty disappointing if you weren't at least a little fond of me." Felicity's breath caught. "Proposal?" Mason's expression grew serious. "I know it's fast. Too fast by any reasonable standard, but I've lived enough to know when something is right." He took her hands in his. "I got the position in Laramie. The house isn't grand, but it's solid with good light for painting. There's a small town nearby where you could teach art if you wanted, or sell your work." "Mason, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to answer today. I'm asking you to come to Laramie with me as my wife if you'll have me, or simply as Felicity James, artist, if you need more time. Either way, I want to build a life with you, to wake up each morning and see the world through your eyes." Tears pricked at Felicity's eyes. "You'd accept either answer, marriage or companionship." "I'd prefer the first," he admitted with a wry smile. "But I've learned that the journey matters as much as the destination. I just want you on my journey, Felicity, however you choose to travel." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the stubble beneath her fingers. "When I came west, I was looking for a new beginning. A chance to define myself by my own choices, not by what society expected of me." She smiled through her tears. "I never expected to find someone who would see those choices as strength rather than stubbornness." "Is that a yes? Yes to Laramie, yes to building a life together." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "And yes, Mason Jameson, I will marry you not because it's expected, but because I can't imagine painting another sunrise without you beside me." His answering kiss was filled with promise, with the certainty of a future stretching before them like an endless horizon. They were married 2 weeks later in the Harringtons' parlor, beneath one of Felicity's completed landscapes. Mrs. Harrington had insisted on arranging everything, from the flowers to the dress she gifted to Felicity, declaring it an investment in the future of art in Wyoming Territory. Mr. Harrington gave the bride away, his booming voice growing suspiciously husky as he placed Felicity's hand in Mason's. The local minister kept the ceremony brief, seeming to understand that the couple needed no lengthy sermons on the meaning of commitment. They had found their own definition. "I still can't believe this is happening," Felicity whispered as they shared their first dance afterward. The Harringtons' parlor cleared for the celebration. "Having second thoughts?" Mason asked, his arm secure around her waist. "The opposite." She leaned into his embrace. For someone who crossed a continent alone, I'm surprisingly certain about this decision. His laugh rumbled through his chest. That's us impulsive and deliberate all at once. The celebration continued late into the evening, the ranch hands joining in with music and dancing that grew increasingly boisterous as the night progressed. Through it all, Mason kept Felicity close, introducing her proudly as my wife, the artist, to everyone who approached. When they finally slipped away, it was to the cabin where they had first begun to know each other. Mrs. Harrington had arranged for it to be prepared for their wedding night, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in jars on every surface. "Our first home," Mason said as he carried her across the threshold, an old tradition he'd insisted on honoring. "Temporary," Felicity reminded him, though the thought of leaving Riverside brought a pang of sadness. "The first of many." He set her gently on her feet. "But we'll come back. I've already spoken to Harrington about regular work driving cattle from here to Cheyenne." In the soft lamplight, they discovered each other anew, their coming together as natural as breathing yet charged with the wonder of exploration. Later, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Mason traced patterns on Felicity's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked, watching the play of emotions across his face. That for a man who spent most of his life believing home was something other people had, I feel remarkably at peace. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Wherever you are, that's home now." They left for Laramie 3 days later, their few possessions packed in saddlebags, and a small wagon Harrington had insisted they take as a wedding gift. Felicity's paintings and art supplies occupied most of the space, a fact that made Mason smile with pride. "First thing I'll build you in Laramie is a proper studio," he promised as they set out, "with windows facing north and east for the best light." The journey took 4 days, following the rolling hills and vast open spaces of the Wyoming Territory. Each night, they camped beneath the stars, and Felicity sketched by firelight while Mason told her stories of his years on the trail. "I used to think the appeal was the movement," he confessed one evening. "Always something new over the next rise. But now, I wonder if I was just waiting to find the right reason to stop." Laramie appeared on the horizon on the morning of the 5th day, a growing settlement nestled against the backdrop of the Snowy Range Mountains. Beyond the town lay the Wilkins Ranch, where Mason would serve as foreman. 5,000 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through the northern section. The ranch house sat on a low rise, a sturdy 2-story structure of logs and river stone. Behind it stood a smaller building that had once been the previous foreman's quarters, but would now serve as Felicity's studio. "Mr. Wilkins and his wife are expecting us for dinner," Mason said as they approached. "But I wanted you to see our home first, without anyone else around." The interior of the house was simple but well crafted, with large windows that caught the western light. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, and a staircase led to 2 bedrooms above. The furnishings were sparse but solid: a table and chairs, a couch before the fireplace, a bed visible through the open door of the ground floor bedroom. "The Wilkins said we could make whatever changes we want," Mason explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Add furniture, change the curtains, whatever makes it feel like ours." Felicity moved through the room slowly, imagining their life unfolding within these walls. "It's perfect," she said finally, meaning it. "It needs some color, some personal touches, but it feels right." Relief washed over Mason's face. "I was hoping you'd say that." That evening they dined with the Wilkins, an older couple who had built the ranch from nothing over 30 years. Calvin Wilkins was retiring from active management due to his health, but he spoke with passion about the land and the cattle, clearly pleased to have found someone like Mason to oversee his life's work. Martha Wilkins took an immediate liking to Felicity, especially when she learned of her artistic background. "We've been trying to bring more culture to Laramie," she declared. "The town is growing and there's talk of the university branch expanding. They'll need art instructors." "I'd be interested in teaching again," Felicity admitted, "though I also want to continue my own work." "Of course," Martha nodded emphatically, "and you must join Our Lady's Cultural Society, small at present but enthusiastic." By the time they returned to their new home, Felicity's head was spinning with possibilities. "I think I'm going to like Laramie," she told Mason as they stood on their porch, watching the stars emerge above the mountains. "I think Laramie is going to love you," he replied, drawing her into his arms. The prediction proved accurate. Within 6 months, Felicity had established herself in the community, teaching art at the small school twice weekly, and selling her paintings to the growing number of merchants and professionals who wanted to decorate their homes with scenes of Wyoming's natural beauty. Her landscapes of the snowy range became particularly sought after, with commissions coming from as far away as Denver and Salt Lake City. Mason thrived as foreman, introducing new breeding stock and innovative grazing practices that increased the ranch's productivity. The respect he earned from the ranch hands was evident in their willing adoption of his methods, and the easy camaraderie that developed around the bunkhouse fire in the evenings. Their home evolved as well, filled with furniture Mason crafted in his spare time and decorated with Felicity's paintings. The studio behind the house became her sanctuary, though she often set up her easel outdoors, especially in the golden hours of early morning and late afternoon, when the light transformed the landscape. On their first anniversary, Mason surprised her with a special gift, a set of paints he'd ordered from San Francisco, colors she had mentioned missing from her palette. "How did you remember?" she asked, amazed by his attention to detail. "I remember everything about that first morning," he said simply. "The way you looked concentrating on your canvas, how your hands moved when you mixed colors, the determination in your eyes despite your hunger." He cupped her face in his hands. "That moment changed my life, Felicity. I'll never forget a detail of it." In return, she gave him a painting she'd been working on secretly for weeks, a portrait of him on horseback against the backdrop of the ranch, the mountains rising behind him, the sky awash with the colors of sunrise. She had captured not just his likeness but something of his essence, the quiet strength, the watchful intelligence, the capacity for tenderness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "So this is how you see me," he said softly, studying the canvas with wonder. "It's who you are," she corrected. "The man who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, the man who brought me food and asked for colors in return." She smiled up at him. "The best trade I ever made." Their second year in Laramie brought new joys and challenges. Felicity's reputation as an artist continued to grow, with a gallery in Denver offering to represent her work. The university branch did indeed expand, and she was offered a position teaching art history and painting techniques 1 day a week. Mason's responsibilities increased as well when Calvin Wilkins suffered a heart attack that left him confined to his home. Though he recovered, the older man relied increasingly on Mason to make decisions about the ranch's operations, eventually offering him a partnership stake rather than a foreman's salary. "He says he has no children to leave it to," Mason explained to Felicity after bringing home the unexpected proposal. "Martha and he want to see the ranch continue after they're gone, with someone who loves the land as they do." "It's an incredible opportunity," Felicity said, understanding the magnitude of what was being offered. "What did you tell them?" That I needed to discuss it with my wife. His eyes searched hers. This would mean putting down permanent roots, Felicity. No more talk of moving on someday if we wanted to. She took his hands in hers. Do you want to move on? No, he answered without hesitation. But I know your work is taking you to new places, Denver, Santa Fe. I don't want to hold you back. Mason Jameson, she said firmly, I can travel for exhibitions and still come home to you. Home isn't a place I'm trying to escape from, it's where I return to find myself again. The certainty in her voice seemed to release something in him. Then I'll tell them yes. Their partnership with the Wilkins formalized. They began planning improvements to the ranch, a new barn, expanded grazing lands, better irrigation for the hay fields. Mason's days grew longer, but his satisfaction in the work was evident in the energy with which he approached each new challenge. Felicity balanced her teaching and painting with involvement in the community, helping to establish Laramie's first proper art exhibition in the town hall. The event drew visitors from neighboring settlements, and even a newspaper reporter from Cheyenne, who wrote a glowing account of the artistic renaissance taking root on the frontier. In the midst of their busy lives, they made time for each other, riding together at dawn to watch the sunrise from different vantage points, sharing meals by candlelight no matter how demanding the day had been, falling asleep each night in each other's arms. It was during one of their dawn rides in the early spring of their third year in Laramie that Felicity finally shared the news she'd been confirming with the doctor in town. I think I'll need to cut back on my teaching next autumn, she said casually as they sat on horseback atop a rise overlooking the ranch. Mason glanced at her, puzzled. Are you taking on more commission work, in a manner of speaking? She met his gaze steadily. I'll be creating something that can't be hung on a wall, though I expect it will be my most challenging work yet. Understanding dawned slowly on his face. Felicity, are you with child? She nodded, unable to contain her smile any longer. Due in October, according to Dr. Simmons. Mason was off his horse in an instant, lifting her from her saddle to spin her in a jubilant circle. A baby, he breathed, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. I never thought I'd have this, Felicity, a home, a partnership, a family. You've given me everything I never knew to wish for. The news spread quickly through the ranch and into Laramie. Martha Wilkins immediately appointed herself honorary grandmother, arriving at the house with bundles of baby clothes she'd preserved from better days, and advice on everything from morning sickness to cradle construction. Mason threw himself into preparing for the new arrival with characteristic thoroughness, converting the smaller upstairs bedroom into a nursery. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving a pattern of stars and mountains into the headboard, and constructed a rocking chair for Felicity that he placed near the window with the best view of the mountains. As her pregnancy progressed, Felicity found herself drawn to new subjects in her painting mothers with children from the town, the tender interactions between animals and their young on the ranch, the cycle of growth and renewal visible in the landscape as spring turned to summer and then autumn. My perspective is changing, she explained to Mason when he commented on the shift in her work. I'm seeing the world through the eyes of someone who is creating not just art, but life. On a crisp October morning with the aspen trees blazing gold against the mountains, Felicity went into labor. Unlike Elizabeth's difficult delivery years earlier, hers progressed steadily and without complications. Dr. Simmons arrived promptly, and Martha Wilkins took charge of the household, keeping Mason occupied with endless small tasks when his nervous energy threatened to overwhelm the birthing room. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that no artist could fully capture, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his healthy lungs to everyone within earshot. "James William Jameson," Felicity whispered as she cradled him against her chest, the name they had chosen to honor both her father and Calvin Wilkins. Mason sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Felicity, one finger captured in his son's tiny but surprisingly strong grip. "He has your eyes," he said, though the baby's eyes were still the unfocused blue of all newborns. "And your determination," she replied with a tired smile. "He certainly wasn't going to wait another day to join us." The years that followed brought changes to their lives and to Laramie itself. The town grew with the expansion of the railroad and the university, bringing new opportunities and challenges. The Wilkins eventually sold their remaining share of the ranch to Mason and Felicity, retiring to a small house in town where they remained frequent visitors to the Jameson home. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's artistic sensitivity and his father's love of the land. When he was 4, he gained a sister, Catherine Rose, named for Mason's mother, who arrived during a spring blizzard that kept Dr. Simmons snowbound at the ranch for 3 days afterward. Through it all, Felicity continued to paint, her work evolving as her life experiences deepened. Her landscapes became renowned throughout the Western Territories, eventually attracting the attention of collectors from as far away as New York and Boston. "You could have exhibitions in the East," Mason remarked one evening as they read a letter from a prominent gallery owner in Chicago. "Return in triumph to show Boston what they missed." Felicity considered the idea, looking around their comfortable home where James and Catherine were playing on the rug before the fire. "Perhaps someday, but everything I want to paint is here." She squeezed his hand. "Everything that matters is here." Mason nodded, understanding as always. "Then they'll have to come to us if they want to see the best of the West through your eyes." And eventually, they did. On the 10th anniversary of the Jamesons' arrival in Laramie, the university hosted a special exhibition of Felicity's work, inviting critics and collectors from across the country. The central piece, the one that drew the most attention and highest praise, was a large canvas titled simply "First Light." It depicted a young woman painting the sunrise from a rocky outcropping, her dress hanging loose on her thin frame. Behind her stood a cowboy, his face illuminated with wonder as he watched her work. The sky blazed with color reds, golds, purples melding into a symphony of light that seemed to radiate from the canvas itself. "Is this autobiographical?" asked a critic from the Chicago Tribune, studying the painting with evident appreciation. Felicity exchanged a smile with Mason, who stood proudly at her side. "It's the moment my life truly began," she answered. "When a hungry artist learned that some gifts come with no price but the promise to see beauty and share it with others." "And the cowboy," the critic pressed, "did he really bring you food in exchange for colors?" Mason's arm slipped around her waist, his touch as familiar and essential as breathing. "Best trade I ever made," he said, echoing the words she had spoken to him years before. "Though I got far more than I bargained for." Later that night, after the exhibition closed and the visitors returned to their hotels, Mason and Felicity walked home beneath a sky brilliant with stars. Their children slept at the Wilkins house in town, giving the couple a rare night alone. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked suddenly, as they paused on the rise overlooking their ranch. "Coming west, meeting a dusty cowboy instead of staying in Boston among people who might have better understood your art." Felicity turned to face him, taking in the features she had painted so many times she could recreate them with her eyes closed, the strong line of his jaw, the crow's feet that had deepened with years of squinting into western sunlight, the steady blue eyes that had never stopped looking at her with wonder. "No one has ever understood my art or me better than you," she said simply. "You saw beauty in a half-starved woman painting a sunrise instead of sensibly searching for her next meal. You brought me food when I was hungry, colors when I had none, and love when I didn't know I was seeking it." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, feeling the same thrill that had coursed through her that first time by the cabin firelight. "You taught me that the most vivid colors aren't found in paint jars, Mason. They're found in the life we create together, day by day, sunrise by sunrise." His arms encircled her, strong and steady as they had been since that first morning when he'd found her painting instead of eating. "Then I'd say we've created a masterpiece," he murmured against her hair, "and we're still adding colors every day." Above them, the endless Wyoming sky stretched like a canvas awaiting the first touch of dawn, promising another day, another sunrise, another chance to capture the beauty they had found together in this wild, wonderful western land.